passionate about it because I don't want you to live another day thinking because of what you've done, God is through with you. And anybody who's giving you that kind of perception about God, anybody who's giving you that kind of interpretation about God is a liar, and the devil's behind that kind of thinking. God can use your past. Now that's Saul. When you read on in Acts chapter 9, verse 4, he says, I'll start at verse 3. Now as he went on his way, he approached Damascus, and suddenly a light from heaven shone around him. And he fell to the ground and heard a voice saying to him, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? And he said, Who are you, Lord? He said, I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting. But rise and enter the city, and you will be told what you ought to do. Let me rush on here, because I can spend a lot of time right there. But listen, we see his past. And now, after this episode, after that verse you just read, the rest of the time you read about Saul, he's referred to as Paul, and all you hear about is God using him. I want you to get the picture right. In chapter 7 and chapter 8, he's rotten to the core. He's bad to the bone. Wait a minute. And he's bad to the bone in his mind, thinking he's right. Now I'm talking to somebody, and I just want to talk to the real people right now. You can attest to the fact, like I can, that a lot of stuff in your past hasn't been done simply because you were just by accident. No, you were serious about that thing. We just recorded a message that will air, I think in a few weeks, about sin, what sin is. And part of that a lesson we deal with, that there are times we sin because that's what we want to do. Come on out that act, and let's stop acting like there's some stuff we don't do. We just do everything wrong by accident. No, I'm the first one to tell you there's some stuff I did because that's what I wanted to do. Dealt with the consequences as a result of it. Seals and I were talking about that on the way. Got to deal with the consequences. But make no mistake about it, the choice was mine. We see Saul with a horrible past, fighting against the very movement of Jesus Christ. But what happens? He meets Jesus. Oh my God. He meets Jesus. Now, let me quickly tell you, when he meets Jesus, he doesn't become perfect. Because later on in Romans chapter 7, he describes the struggle that he has. He says the good. Now, he's saved now. He's got a relationship with Jesus Christ. He talks about it in chapters 4, 5, and 6. But he gets to chapter 7 and he says there's a struggle going on the inside. And I don't want to go too deep in that because it'll throw me off. But the point is, his meeting Jesus did not make him perfect, but it did give him relationship. Jesus meets this man with a horrible past. Watch it now. And he does not erase his past. And that's important for you to understand, because there are a lot of people feel as though when you come to Jesus, he erases your past. No, he's God. Man, God doesn't have to erase your past to change your future. He can use your past. Watch this now. So Saul meets Jesus, starts being called by Paul. Watch what God does with Paul and his past. Watch what God does with Paul and his past, because it's the same thing he wants to do with you and I with our past, not in spite of our past, with our past. Now, let me tell you one of the things before I get to these 3 points and we'll get out. Let me tell you one of the things that I think is one of the greatest experience of freedom and liberation. When you can get delivered from what people think about your past. When you can get delivered from what people think about your past. You see, too many of us are held hostage because of what folk know about you. And they ain't spent but maybe 3 or 4 years in church. We ain't never read the Bible, heard a whole bunch of stuff other preachers say, and now they just want to embrace that and know something about you. And you can't praise God, you can't move on because you're worrying about who knows what you used to do. Man, you better get that out your head. You better get that out your head and stand boldly with that. Making any sense to you? Why? Because everybody you meet has a past and everybody you meet has a future. And the people who are productive are the people who understand that God, who can give me a future, is the same God who can handle my past. Watch what God does with Paul's past. Here's the first thing. Watch this. In Acts chapter 17, we see God taking his past. Watch this now. I want to start reading at verse number 22 of Acts chapter 17. So Paul standing in the midst of Areopagus saying, men of Athens, now this is a hill he's on. Men of Athens, I perceive that in every way you are very religious. For as I pass along, I observed the objects of your worship. I found also an altar with this inscription, to the unknown God. What therefore you worship as unknown, this I proclaim to you. Now let me tell you what Paul is doing. Paul, who has this horrible past, you ready for this? Is now being used by God to evangelize the sinner. Let me tell you what that simply means, because I like to preach with alliteration, so that's the preacher in me. Evangelize the sinner. Let me tell you what that means. Here we got Paul on Mars Hill talking to all of the philosophers, all of the educators who are religious, and on this mountain there's a place, a stone with all of the other images and statues to these other gods, but then there's this statue, this place, and this is for the unknown God. And Paul says, I'm going to tell y'all about this unknown God. In other words, all of these other gods y'all worshiping ain't nothing to them, but this God here, the one y'all don't know about, let me proclaim him. What's your point, Bishop Clark? God takes a man with a horrible past who was hurting people and imprisoning people and had the authority, if they resisted, to kill people who were following Jesus. God takes him and now uses him to communicate to people about the same Jesus he was trying to stop. Why would God do that? Can I give you an answer? And this is why he will use your past. Because who better to convince an alcoholic about how God can use you and keep you than somebody who was once an alcoholic? Y'all ain't hearing what I'm saying. Who best to tell a fellow who was in the street doing his thing, getting his money, that, hey man, there's another way to live than a fellow who was once there? Who best to tell a brother, man, being a whoremonger and being a womanizer may feel good, but the end result, it damages your character. It puts you in situations that you don't want to be in. Who better to say that to a brother than a man who's been there? You see, God takes your past and he uses you to help folk, watch this, who are where you've been. And the reason why the church is not making the impact that we need to make is because we don't want people to know the stuff that we've done. We don't want people to know the stuff that, and we get so hypocritical now. We say stuff like, when other folk do stuff, we say stuff like, ooh, that's a dirty shame. They acting like that's a low down, dirty shame. And child, they supposed to be a Christian. But now let them be guilty of the same thing. Well, now, ain't nobody perfect. We all got something we struggling with. No, let's be honest. Listen, there were some things I've done in my past, but because I met Jesus, now I can use that past and help somebody else, because my past, you ready for this, is somebody's present. Where you were, somebody's there right now. And God wants to use what you've been through to let that person know you can get through it. Come on, sister. I know you feel me. I know that there's sometimes, you played the fool. You thought you was in love, but realizing it was just lust, and you put all your eggs in the basket. You cut off your mama and them, didn't speak to your auntie, got mad at your sister because she was talking about your man, and it didn't work out. And now you've matured. You got yourself together. God has got you out of that so that you can go back to tell that sister who may be stuck on stupid. Girl, I know what you're at. I know where you've been. I've been there. I've been there. And guess what happens? Your testimony about what you have been through because of your past could open her eyes and encourage her to let her know that, listen, it is very possible for you to come out of this. You see, y'all, the issue ain't that people don't want to know Jesus. The issue is people want to know folk who know Jesus and what was life like for them before Jesus. So he evangelizes the sinner. But then, watch this now, he does something else. We go to Acts chapter 26. I hope this is helping somebody. We go to Acts chapter 26 and listen to what he says in verse 27 and 28 of Acts chapter 6. After sharing his testimony before King Agrippa, look what happens. Verse 26, I'll start reading at verse 24. But Paul said, I'm not out of my mind, most excellent Festus, but I'm speaking true and rational words. For the king knows about these things, and to him I speak boldly. For I am persuaded that none of these things has escaped his notice. Paul's talking about early in the chapter how he shared his testimony. He says none of these things have escaped his notice, for this has not been done in the corner. Paul says, I'm not coming to y'all telling y'all something y'all don't know. That's one of the things I appreciate, and I thank God for the strength he's given me. I ain't hiding from nothing. I've done a whole bunch of stuff I ain't ashamed of. In fact about it, I done some stuff folk don't even know about. Now, if you're not going to throw no guilt trip and play that, not me, not this preacher. Why? Because I know that all of us got something. And God can use it if you let him. So he stands before King Agrippa, and listen to what King Agrippa said. King Agrippa, do you believe the prophets? I know that you believe. And Agrippa said to Paul, in a short time you would have persuaded me to be a Christian. And Paul said, whether short or long, I would to God that not only you, but also all who hear me this day might become such as I am, except for these chains. In other words, he not only evangelizes the sinner, gets an opportunity to tell folk who don't know Jesus how they can get to know Jesus, but he also gets to expose the seekers. You see, King Agrippa says to Paul, man, you almost persuaded me. Paul goes on to say, whether today or another day, I hope you get it. God can use your past, you ready for this, as a commercial for grace.